effective and how many hands-on things we're trying to do. We'll see if we can fit it all in our hour here. But we're going to attempt demos in desktop, server, and public today. So hang with me there as we attempt to get that done. But if you can go to my Tableau public website, that's that first URL up there, you can download the presentation that we're going to go through today. And that presentation actually has the desktop demos in it, so that'll give you everything you need for the desktop portion. And the name of our presentation we're going through today that you're going to find out on Tableau Public is Design for User Experience. And I'll just jump over here. So that's what the page looks like, and this is the workbook you want to get right here. So to introduce myself, my name is Melanie Manning. I'm the CEO and founder of Empower Business Optimization Consulting. We're an Atlanta-based consulting firm offering analytics design, development, and deployment services for enterprise visual analytics projects. We specialize in maximizing the benefit of the Tableau suite for our clients. From desktop to server and online to Tableau Prep. So we're have a broad reach across the Tableau suite. Today I'm going to discuss some tips and tricks for optimizing the user experience, and we'll get into design and also touch on some great features of Tableau Server. So this discussion assumes that your preferred way of sharing your dashboards is through Tableau Server or Tableau Online. If you use, Reader or just desktop to share person to person, that's kind of outside the scope of what we're going to do here. But this is, being able to share your visualizations with broad audiences. So we mentioned the resources here, and hopefully by now you have had a chance to go to the site and download it. Item number 3 is if you have access to a Tableau server or Tableau online site, go ahead and log into it and just kind of have it to the side because we'll have a little bit of that later on in the presentation. But that's optional. You can follow along on the screen as well if you don't have it. And so while you're doing those downloads and logins, I'll just give you a little intro to my Tableau story. I always enjoy it when the presenters share their backstory. So I started off my career in 1997, don't do the math, in finance and operations. So I've had corporate jobs all that time, focused, definitely a numbers girl, minored in math, majored in finance in school. But in that time, I've been a business owner for pretty much every BI project that came our way, on the accounting team, the operations team, the finance team, whatever I happened to be on at the time. So I've come at BI projects from the perspective of the business owner on the project. I'm focused on driving activities and outcomes and using analytics stories to do it. So I'm really focused on what can we do to improve the business based on this knowledge, right? Throughout my career, I've delivered projects which were developed in partnership with our IT teams using a number of different technologies, but Tableau is by far my favorite. I first became aware of Tableau in 2012 when our marketing team went rogue and spent $2,000 on a desktop license so that they could build analytics of their own. And I saw that and saw what they were able to do in a short period of time, and I was hooked from there. After that, I committed in 2014. I went to the conference in Seattle, which was my favorite. I went to Vegas the following year. The conference was much larger and smokier that year. And I'm looking forward to going to New Orleans this year. I'm booked, ready to go. But I kind of view my career in terms of, starting in 2014, I founded Empower, and so I left that corporate job and I decided I wanted to do this all the time, right? I mean, delivering these analytics to the masses is a powerful thing, especially if you can translate them in such a way that the non-analysts get it, right? Like the people out there making the daily decisions in their jobs, they get it. And so after I kind of got hooked on that, I started to view my career in terms of BT and AT, so before Tableau and after Tableau. And so that's how I've come to be in front of you today. So that piece was in PowerPoint of the presentation, but I really want to be true to our favorite technology here, and I've got from here on out we'll be in Tableau, using the Tableau story feature of desktop. So I'm not sure if many of you have used this, but as a person who is a kind of an expert at PowerPoint, I find stories to be fairly limiting, but there are a lot of great benefits to them, and I would love to see Tableau continue to invest in it. So, you know, the name of this presentation is designed for user experience. So, you know, what's the difference between interface and experience if you're not familiar with that already? The way I view it is, you know, the user interface is visuals, what images you put in front of the user, and experience takes that a level further and takes it to flow. So there's a bit of empathy, a bit of getting in the shoes of your user when you design for user experience. You try to understand, you know, what perspective they're coming at the analysis from and what their next level questions are going to be, and you incorporate that into design. And I once heard it said at a training session, and I thought this was a really good way to put it, that user experience is the bridge between complicated technology products and end users. And so, you know, that's kind of how I think of it. I'm always trying to bridge that gap, right? No matter how complex that dashboard is that you're building, no matter how many amazing things it's doing under the hood, you're trying to distill it down into a language and a perspective that your users are going to connect with, so that they can glean the benefits from it. So to me, beauty comes second to functionality. The real goal here is to have impact on the business. So the first of our tips and tricks, and really kind of one of the most important ones, is to make it personal. Users aren't going to use a tool just because they're told to. It might be mandated on them, and I've seen that approach happen, but it doesn't have lasting impact. Users need to understand what's in it for them, right? How it's going to impact their performance and their personal jobs in order to want to use it. So the first thing you need to do is define who is my primary user. And the word primary is really key in that sentence, because you're going to have plenty of secondary users get benefit from whatever you deploy out onto server. So you might have the sales team came to you because they have a problem, and you're trying to generate analytics for the sales team. But secondarily, the accounting team's going to probably check in on that. They're going to like to see what the sales team is up to. And the marketing team actually has some interest in this area too, right? So those are your secondary users in that scenario. If you're designing for your sales team, then you're going to find out, okay, what kind of device does the sales team use? What resolution is it? What perspective do they have? What's their first level and second level question that they're trying to answer? And so, you know, a one-size-fits-all approach really fits no one. My advice would be to take that primary user and run with it, right? They're your primary person that you're trying to serve here. Your secondary users get benefit, great. So one example here that we're going to use in a demo, and I see a few folks have out their computers, so great. So we're looking at, down here in the bottom left, a before example of just trend data. It's really simple data. It's the sample superstore data that Tableau provides with the desktop. And we're looking at the trend of the trailing, it looks like 13 months of sales over based on month of order date. And it's informative, and if I hover, I can see my standard tooltip, right? But what it's not is personal. It's not telling me, well, is it good or bad that I sold $96,000 in December of 2017? How does that compare to last year? How does that compare to my goal? Am I meeting my goal, right? So that's where that's the difference between making it informative and making it personal. So this is an example of one way to make it personal, right? So all I did was I took that same data and I flipped it to a bar chart and I dragged in a monthly target, right? And then I even included the targets. So I'm showing year-to-date actuals through August. We're sitting in August today. But then I also am showing the goal in the future so that they can see, like, well, what am I expected to do for the rest of the year, right? Like, I want to know I want to look in the rearview mirror and understand how I performed up to this point. But it's also important to me in doing my job to understand what's expected of me moving forward, right? So the example here that we can do together is on the Target Data tab. And I'm going to take it out of presentation mode to do this. What I've done, and it's a fairly common scenario. Sometimes you're lucky enough that target data is in the database accessible where you can pull it in more dynamically than this. But it's also a common scenario that the target that's personal to that team that you're building for, you know, it doesn't exist anywhere but in an Excel spreadsheet, right? Maybe the high-level target for the corporation is loaded in the ERP tool, but you know, you're serving the operations team A, right? And theirs is not loaded at the high level. So in order for them to measure their personal performance, you might need to do something like pull in an Excel spreadsheet, right? That's that they are able to enter their goals into. So what you see here is that I have two data sources open. I have the targets data source, which is simply that Excel spreadsheet, and then I have like my actual data, which is the sample superstore data. And so first we're going to just go ahead and take a look at it, just to bring those two data sources together, and we're going to use a blend to do that. And I'm going to recommend that we blend, making our target be the primary data source. And the reason we do that is so that we can see targets for periods even if we have no actuals to go against them, right? That's how we were able to show those lines out into the future. So the way you make a data source a primary data source in a blend is to drag it out first. It's pretty simple, right? So we're going to right-click the target month and bring it out onto rows. And we want to do month year. And then we'll go ahead and we'll take our target amount and drag it to text, right? So we can see that our Excel spreadsheet has targets in it from dating back from August 2017 all the way through January 2019. And the next thing we want to do is bring in our actuals right beside it. So as we come over to our actuals, you have to define a data relationship, right, between your two data sources so that Tableau knows on what basis to blend that data together. So our primary data source is targets. Our secondary data source is sample superstore. And we're blending them on month year of the date, right? So we have a target month, we're blending it on month year, and we have an order date, and we're blending it on month year. And all that does is take the day of the month out of the equation, right? Because it doesn't matter what day it is, we're judged on monthly results. Okay, and then we activate our blend by clicking the little icon here that's right beside the order date in our secondary data source. In this case, it is in the sample superstore. And so now we've effectively blended our data together so that we can bring in our actuals data and it will be comparable to our target. So sales is what we're comparing against, and I'm just going to double click it so that it can pop out here into the view. And as you can see, you've got a monthly result for sales that varies, right? And it's being compared against a target amount. If I were to deactivate that blend, I'm going to get an error message, and I'm just going to see total sales, because it has no idea what to show me on each row, right, until I activate that relationship. So we'll go ahead and activate it again. And so you can see what we're going to do a visualization based on. Now I've taken it a step further, and I've created a calculation for year-to-date sales, just so that we can look at, our data has actuals all the way through December 2018, but let's, in our reality world, right, we're sitting in August right now, so we're just going to only pull in results through August with our calculations. So the order date has to be less than September for us to see a result. So I'll bring in year-to-date sales as well. But the beautiful thing about the blend and making the target be the primary data source is that even though January 2019 is null, right, so we have no actuals in 2019, I still can see my target amount. And in the case of comparing year-to-date sales versus the target, even in the months when I have 0, because I haven't made it to September 2018 yet, I still have my target amount. So now we're going to take that same data and we're going to put it into the visualization. And if you're following along and maybe going at a different pace than me, you might be going faster than me. We do have all the instructions down here for what we're going to apply. So you can follow along. So the first thing I want to do is I want to filter the target month for this year. And I'm going to do that by right click and drag in the filter and select relative date and choose years this year. Okay, and then I'll take the sum of the target amount and bring it to detail. Okay, so we don't want to bring it out into the viz just yet, but we do want it available so that we can bring in a reference line later on for our comparison point. So we're putting it on detail, and because we took our first fields from the target data source first, it gets that little blue check mark indicating that it's now identified as the primary data source, right? So it's going to dictate everything we get to see from here on out. So now I'm going to come over to Sample Superstore, and I'm going to double click to add year-to-date sales to rows. And it's saying, well, wait a minute, you need to blend the data because I don't know how these two data sources are supposed to talk to each other. So I can come over here and click the little activator link, and so now our two data sources can work together. And I'm going to take our target month, I'm going to right click on it, and I want it to be a discrete period. And since we're looking at 1 year at a time, I can just do simply month of target month. And so where have I landed? Almost right back where I came, right? So I've got my line chart here, but now I'm going to flip it to a bar chart. And you notice, September, October, November are giving me 0 values. But I'm flipping it to a bar chart. I find that when you're comparing against a target, if you're just doing a simple, straightforward visualization like this, line charts are great to show trends, but bar charts, even if you're still showing a trend, they're useful to compare against a target, right? Especially in a scenario where you're going to use a reference line to do it. So now that we have our actuals, I'm going to take my reference line and I'm going to drag it out to cell. And that's because I want to have a reference line on every single month, right? I don't want to have one line going across the whole thing, which is what I would get if I did an entire table. Right? I want to have a line that's dedicated to each cell. I'm going to go ahead and make this darker so you can see it. And so right now, my reference line is based on year-to-date sales, which is the exact same thing that my bars are based on. So I'm going to change that to base it on target amount, total target amount. So now I can see the difference for, here's what my target was, here's what my actual was, right? And I think I'd like to, I can consider adding, a label to my reference line if I wanted to. If it was valuable to show exactly what the target was, I could do that here, but to me, I think that makes it a little noisy, so I'm gonna leave that off. And I'd like to really call out the periods that make the target or not make the target. So we have a calculation in here that's called meets or below target. It's very straightforward. It says, if the sum of sales is greater than the target amount, then meets, otherwise below. So if I take that out onto color, I see that, the default color that's already been applied here is to call out like, boom, these are the 2 months that we made it, great, right? The alternative, this is where it comes down to knowing your primary user. So does your primary user want to sing your praises and call out the months that you made it? Or do they want to identify the areas for opportunity or the risks to the business where you didn't make it, right? So this is the story where we're calling out our successes, right? So maybe the story is that a key person on the team quit in February, so we had a really bad run there until we were able to replace them in July, and look, we're back on track, right? So that's kind of the story you might tell if you have, if you use this color palette. The other way around, if your intention is to say, uh-oh, like we've missed almost every month this year, right? Like, and so you can use color like on a dime to change the perspective of the message you're delivering, right? And so another thing that I really love to do, this Tableau default tooltip is informative, but it doesn't serve as much of a function of being that bridge for end users to understand complicated analytics as I would like for it to. So one thing I really like to do is write a sentence in that tooltip. So I'm literally interpreting the result for the user and telling them what they're looking at in plain English, right? So, let's say that the gap to budget is also kind of important to us. So I'm going to take the gap to target, which is just doing, the target amount minus sales. And I'm going to put that on Tooltip so that it's available to me as well. And so here is and I always like to uncheck these too, that's just a personal preference. So here's my sentence, or my start of what my sentence could be. And I'm just going to go ahead and switch it around so that it speaks in plain English to our end users. So this month's sales of that were either below target of this amount by this difference. Okay, so that's just one example of how you might be able to write a sentence out of these, right? And I don't make it all bold and dark. I really make that tooltip kind of fade into the background, except for the pieces that I want to make pop, right? So I think that the current month's sales needs to pop. So I'm going to make it darker and bolder and even larger. And I think that gap needs to pop, right? These are the things I want to draw the user's eye to. And I think that, whether or not they met their target, that's the other thing I want to have pop. Okay. So when we hover now, we see that August sales of 63,000 meet target of 50,000 by $13,000 overage, right? I could have had another calculation there that said overage or shortfall that came in after that 13,000 number. But, that's just kind of one more way to build that bridge to your end user so that they can interpret what they're looking at. Another example here is, this is the same line, the same before line. And this is on the tab labeled 3 benchmark. And so, let's say you don't have a target. Maybe the business, hasn't set a target for this yet. But you still, it's still useful to give your users a benchmark of some kind, right? To compare, like, are we growing from last year? Are we doing better or worse than X, right? So in this case, you know, the example might be last year's sales. So we're going to go ahead and just filter for the last 2 years. We're taking our before example, and we're just saying, show me the last 2 years. And we can flip our column months to discrete. Keep it at months, but make it discrete. And the reason we want to do that is because then we can take our order date and we can right-click, drag it onto color based on year. Okay, and once we do that, we have 2 lines on top of each other. One is 2017, one is 2018. So even though, you know, I don't have a target comparison here, I at least can tell in any given month that, you know, this year's sales, and always make this year's sales be the color that pops, right? This year is the year that the focus is on. Last year, maybe in gray, maybe something pale, right? Because it's not that thing you're drawing your user's eye to, it's just there for comparison purposes. But at least you can see, all right, well, it looks like in September, you know, we did quite a bit better than we did last year. But it at least, you know, develops that story for your users. Okay, so that's make it personal, and that'll sort of be intertwined in everything else we talk to from here. So another tip is meet the users where they are. And the only thing I'm going to say to you that's in bold, blue, underlined, large font is if they require tables, give them tables. It requires some empathy and some understanding. I know, I've been there. But the users need to feel comfortable with the tool that you're delivering to them, right? And if their comfort zone is Excel or looking at exact numbers to the penny, right? You can give them that, but you can also kind of shepherd them in the right direction by making, you know, the visual interactive analytics more prominent on the page, right? One trick I like to do is I'll put the visuals up at the top, and then I'll start the table, like just so that you can see that it exists down there, but they have to scroll to get to it. Another trick is to use an action filter and put it on a completely separate page, right? So they can drill down from a picture and go land on a table, right? So one example that I have here, this was a metric that we were asked to build, and it was a pretty convoluted metric, and not only that, it affected incentive comp for the team that was going to be judged with it. And, you know, the initial discussion was, okay, well, we want to show these metrics in a bar chart and how they trend over time and compare them to each other. And, you know, when we understood the gravity of this metric, that it was literally affecting people's pay, we agreed to provide a backup sheet that was accessible through an action filter, you know, drill down, show me how this was calculated, right? So the 2 metrics that are affecting the users here, I'm actually going to go back out here. You know, the result is 5.7 days and 5.2 days, right? So if your pay is affected by what that number is, right, like you kind of want to know what's calculating into that number. And it wasn't as straightforward as you might like it to be. So we gave users the ability to drill through and see like what the data was that was calculating into their number. And so, you know, all of these individual rows are summing to this 3,095 number. And we showed them that the 3,095 number divided by 540, which the detail to that was right down below as well, equals that metric that they're being judged on, right? So we're making it personal to them. That metric affects them personally. But we're also keeping the dashboard from being a black box, right? But bring them along with you on the journey, right? Like, and if they trust it, they'll use it. If they trust it, they'll believe it and want to go use it. Another tip of meeting users where they are is, I think many of us have probably heard this before, but it's just our natural human nature to consume information kind of from the top left to the bottom right, in a bit of a Z pattern. So just when you're placing visuals in a dashboard, just keep that in mind. You know, and it's not a hard and fast rule. I break from this rule occasionally when I feel that it's beneficial to do so. But one thing that is really valuable and it's really asked for more often than not is, you know, users want you to boil it down to like the one number that like tells them the answer, you know? And then they can look down below and they can see all the detail that is going into that. But like having those like boom, boom, boom text right there at the top, right? That just helps people kind of orient themselves and get on solid ground before they go dig in. Another nice way of providing that like summarized output is also in the form of a chart. That particular chart is actually like an interactive action filter as well. So they can immediately see like the summation of this is pipeline data, sales pipeline data from Salesforce. So they can see that our stage 1 pipeline is 31 million like in total, right? But here's how it spreads across the months that it expects to close and the products that they're selling and whatnot, right? But they can see the summary at the top and then click it if they want to filter everything. But you know, just keeping in mind that Z pattern when you're placing various visualizations. Again, back to that bridge, right? We're creating a bridge, we're creating a sense of comfort, we're creating consistency for users, right? That's part of it. So, if, you know, in this particular case, this is a workbook that has 3 views on it, right? So if you're thinking in Tableau desktop language, it's 3 dashboards within that workbook, right? And they're telling 3 completely different stories. There's a common thread among them that it's telling a customer story, so that's why they're all part of one workbook. But they're using different data sources, they're using different metrics entirely, right? But they're still part of a story that is relevant to put all together in one workbook. So what we did, you know, this is just showing an example of consistent title and filter placement, right? And even though they're completely different, we've got the link to email accounting if you have questions or issues, right? This is just a hyperlink that you click and they can immediately shoot off a communication to a support person. We've got a main title followed by the as of date of the data. You know, we've done a lot of things with the as of date of the data. We've placed it in the footer, we've placed it in the tooltip, we've placed it in this little help bubble, you know, over time. But I think the common thread that we really find is that users like to see it front and center, like the subtitle, boom, right? They know how current their data is that they're looking at. In this case, we decided to put the filters like right up there in the title row so that we could devote more space to the analytics down below. And when users hover over this little help bubble, it just gives them some tips and tricks for how to interact with the view and how to get certain answers, and we even put things like definitions of certain terms in there, you know, just whatever is useful to users to get a comfort. So, but the bottom line there being like they're all the title lines all structured the same, the filters are all in the same place, you know, everything is kind of structured so users are oriented. So this one is less hands-on, it's just a before and after, but when showing trends over time, one thing that's nice to do is provide a total for the relevant period as well. I mean, sometimes the business users won't ask for that initially, like you'll sort of zero in on it maybe over time, but again, keeping it personal, you know, they want to see their trends, but they also need to know, you know, how that affects the time period that they're being judged on, right? So in this case, we continue to show the monthly trend, but then we threw in the year-to-date total, right? And then, you know, I have some tips here for tooltips in terms of some norms that I like to adhere to with the font that we use in the tooltips. And one of the things I like to do is provide italic tips to users when they can do something here that they may not realize, you know. And I try to keep the view uncluttered, so I try not to put instructions all over the face of the view. So tooltips are a really great way to avoid doing that. So, you know, when I hover over the west zone here, it tells me, okay, I can filter based on that, you know, great. Again, you know, I mentioned here there's our sentence that we wrote out to interpret for users, but also down there in italics at the bottom is another user tip that we wrote, just a personal tip for them. This information is based on orders that were entered into the beta system by the contracting team, right? So I'm sure you've had those scenarios where it's like, okay, well, we have tickets that come in from this system and that system, and they're aggregated here, and which one is the source for this information, right? Throw that into the tooltip, and you can head off questions, right? So, in the interest of keeping the view uncluttered, I use the rule every pixel has a purpose. If you have a line in your chart and you can't explain why it's adding value, get rid of it. If you have measures that are, or if you have labels that are showing in your view and they're not absolutely necessary to the user, don't show them. So, a few things here. Minimizing noise, like excess story. What I mean by that is, like, sometimes you're doing analysis and you've made something really cool that you really want to include because it looks so great, and to you it's like really blowing your mind. But it's not part of the core story, right? Who's your primary user? What do they need to know? If they don't need to know it, don't put it in just because it looks cool. Labeling, axis lines. I mentioned before, I love to use tooltips to hide things. If users say, oh, but we also need to see these are 3 extra fields, like, well, if you don't need to see it on the face, we'll tuck it in that tooltip and it'll export when you export to Excel, right? Because a lot of the time that's what they're going to end up doing. Leverage the highlight action to show your text labels. So that's another, like, in this viz here, like, every single field is labeled, right? Like, but there's a way to show labels, but not show them all at once and not make them overwhelming like this. And I also use floating blanks to cover items, right? And I probably, most of you have used this, but a way that a floating blank helps you is, like, if users hover over something that you don't want them to do, like, click on this little plus by the quarter, and now it's even uglier, right? I don't want them to be able to do that. I'm going to keep them from doing that. So you can just throw a floating blank over it, and it doesn't have to show. So in our after example, we've spoken to our primary user, and we've learned that they don't care about data from 2015. They only care about data from the last 13 months. So we've minimized the noise by reducing the scope of our story. We have added labels here to indicate what these lines mean, but we've also given them labeling feature to show the amount when they're clicked on, right? So I only have to focus on one at a time. It doesn't have to cause my eyes to bug out looking at labels on every single field. And I've added my floating blank down to the bottom so that I can't click to drill down to this axis even if I wanted to. Right? And as an end user, I don't know that you've done that to me, right? I don't know that you've limited my ability to do things. It's just there's no longer a little plus sign here for me to drill down, right? So who has never used Tableau Server or Tableau Online? Okay, I'll go over this real quick, and this isn't, you can refer to this later if need be as well, but just for terminology's sake, Tableau Server uses similar but different terminology than desktop. So server uses the term of project, and users think of projects in terms of folders. They think that all their dashboards are kept in folders, and so a project is where we can control security access. A workbook happens to use the same name as a workbook in Tableau Desktop, and that's a collection of dashboards, I guess you could think of it as. And so then the most important term that I just want to make sure we define for folks who aren't used to server is a view. So in Tableau Server, a view is what desktop calls a dashboard. Right. So in Tableau Desktop, you create worksheets and then you put them together in a dashboard, right? In Tableau Server, those dashboards are called views. Okay. Okay, so when I go forward, I'm going to be using the term view, and that's what I mean when I use it. So Tableau Server does some things that I feel like they treat as like secondary features that they don't really like promote that much, but I think they're awesome. And I mean, when we train, we love deploying dashboards to non-analytical folks, like folks who would never normally want numbers in their hands, and we love to tell a story in a way that they can consume it, right? But convincing them to like go into a tool that they're not used to using when they're already busy and is not always so easy, right? So you want to make it really easy for them to get there. And so these are a few things that Tableau Server does to help you do that. Creating custom views is one of them. So in the example here, when you're in Tableau Server, you've got a URL here that has a standard structure, and you've got workbook / name of the view here as the URL. But if you apply some filters to that data, you can then save the view as a name that you create, and then you can go back to that view anytime you want with one click. Instead of having to click 5 times to apply all the filters that you want to apply, every time you go in there, you just save the view, and it's one click away. And even better, you can even, this team cares about stage 4 and 5. So let's do stage 4 and 5 for them. Oh. What I did to negate that, but and so now I can subscribe to it. Now, if I have rights, I can subscribe other users to it as well. I don't have to just subscribe me. But in this case, I'm just going to subscribe me, check the checkbox. Just this view, if I wanted to, I could send the entire workbook. But really, I find that the least noise way to go about this is to send one view at a time, especially because this is a saved view that's already personalized for the recipient. And send it as rarely as possible. If you start sending it to them multiple times a day, you're creating more noise, and they're going to just filter that email out of their inbox, right? So, I'd say the maximum that I generally try to do is weekly. Let's say weekly at 9 o'clock. Tableau really gives you a lot of choices for what time of day to send. And on Monday, right? So maybe the first thing that they see when they come in on Monday is this information to help them plan out their week. You can give it a subject. In this case, I'm going to say stage 4 and 5 pipeline. And I'm going to write them a message, or write myself a message. I can, I'm doing this for myself here. And I'm going to say, keep an eye on full year finish, right? Just whatever is going to kind of draw my eye and remind me why this is important to me. And you know what? Don't send it if the view is empty. Because every once in a while a data refresh fails and the data's not there. Don't send it if it's empty. Don't create noise, right? You don't need to. Subscribe. So over here is an example of what that looks like. So if you subscribe to a view, so if you subscribe to a view, it's going to come in your email inbox, and it's going to look exactly like it looked in Tableau Server. And it's going to be with the data refreshed as of the most recent data refresh date, like however often you're refreshing that data. And if I receive that email and I look at that if I look at that image, it's just an image picture right now. If I look at it and I say, oh, everything looks good, no surprises there, I delete that email and I move on with my day. And I never have to go into Tableau Server at all. But now I've received my insights, right? I've got my information I need for the day. But if I look at it and I say, oh man, I don't like how that looks, I want to see what's going on in April, I single click and I go into it. One click lands me on my saved view, right? Like, that's powerful, right? So now I wanted to look at April. That's the whole reason I clicked in. Okay, I scrolled down. I've seen what I need to see, and I'm done, right? So this is a very simplified scenario, but a really great tool, subscriptions in Tableau Server. And then Tableau Server took it a step farther in a recent release, and they added alerts. And alerts are very similar to subscriptions, only they're data-driven. The one requirement to do an alert in a visualization is you have to have a numeric axis to drive it from. So if you have like a hidden axis or something in your view, you have to show it so that you can create alerts from it. But so in this case, we'll just we'll go back to the original view here for this same workbook. And here's our contract value by close month, broken down by sales stage. So I want to see, I'm going to click my axis for total pipeline for the month. And I'm going to say, I want to create an alert based on that. So send an email if the sum of the total contract value is above or equal to $54 million. Right? I can make that anything I want. I could say, show it to me if it's $20 million. And the nice thing is the visual will update for you to show you how many different records are going to trigger that alert. But for this, let's just go back to our 54 default million. And again, I can customize the subject of the email. So I'm going to say sales pipeline greater than 54 million. That's my subject. Again, less is more in terms of frequency. I would say I only want to see this the first time it happens, right? Like, I don't want to see it every time. I don't want to get a response or an update every single time. If my numbers are still the same, I don't want to keep getting alerted on it, right? So just show it to me the first time it happened. And it's going to come to me. And if I wanted to add any other folks on my team to receive this alert, I could add them too right here. And then create alert. And so again, just like the subscription, you get an email, which is an image. It looks like this. And it shows your alert line. It shows the reason that you got this alert, and it even gives you a little bit of text at the beginning, which is auto-created to tell you why you're getting it, right? The sum of the total contract value was above or equal to 54 million. And so, if you look at it, you're happy with it, great, delete it, move on. If you have concerns about it, one click, go straight into the view, right? Again, so the goal here being to minimize clicks and get users to insights with as fast a speed as possible. Okay, so from here to the end, we're going to talk about hyperlinks. Does anyone use hyperlinks on Tableau Server to pass filters between views? Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? Like, they're powerful. There are quite a few ways to use hyperlinks. This is for one-click access. My favorite way to use a hyperlink is kind of as a drill-down feature, right? So because we design each of our workbooks for a primary user, we don't necessarily always put every level of detail in that workbook, right? So, take the example of an executive dashboard, which is going to be high level. They don't care about each individual order. They care about totals and targets and trends. And so if I create an executive dashboard, I might not have the detail in that dashboard. But I might have another dashboard that I've created for the ops team, right? And they care about the details, and they're looking at the details. And it's a separate dashboard, but I want to give the executives the ability to access that intelligence if they needed it, right? So a nice way to do that is by a hyperlink filter. There's a lot more text here than I'm going to read here, but this is just for reference for kind of there's a standard structure for the Tableau Server URL. And from here on out, I'm going to use Tableau Public because we can all do this in Tableau Public. So here's our hyperlink to our Tableau Public site. And as you see, our standard is The things in orange are the variables. So there's the server name / text, then a site name / text, then a workbook name, then a view name, right? And that's the way they're all structured. But the real magic comes into play when you start extending that URL to add either parameters or filters to the URL so that you can pass information between views or between dashboards. So, you know, here we have our standard. This is a single filter example, and it begins with our standard URL that we use to access any view on any Tableau server site. But then, in order to add a parameter or a filter to that URL, you put a question mark to indicate that you're getting ready to add additional instruction. You put that field name equals what you want it to equal, right? So it's pretty straightforward. This example here takes us over to Tableau Public again. And here we are passing, here's the portion, here's the filter portion of our URL. So we started with the question mark. So it says, okay, you know, the filter is coming, right? The further direction is coming. The name of the field that we're filtering based on is the stage field, right there. The stage needs to equal for scope commitment. Now, if you're typing out a hard-keyed URL like I just did, you have to encode spaces. You have to replace them with %20. So, you know, coming from a less technical person, to me that's a pain in the butt, but that's what you have to do. And so that's why you see the %20s in there. And you know, you can change it on the fly. If I wanted to change the 4 to a stage 3, I could do that right here within the URL, and it will actually change the behavior of the view to update to what I'm asking it to show me. You can even do the same thing with multiple field selections and with multiple filters. So in this second example, we have our question mark, we have our standard URL, and we're going to filter on stage and product group in this example. And we've got our question mark followed by the field name and the selection, but then we want to filter on a second field name. So then we put an ampersand to indicate that we're about to filter on a second field, and we name that field and what we want that to be. And if we want to filter on more than one thing, we put a comma between them so that we can select both, right? So I'm filtering on stage 4 and product group 1 and product group 2. All of those things in one URL. And so this is what the URL looks like, and this is what it does. So we got to come all the way back. Here's our question mark that began our statement. And here's our stage filter, which allowed us to filter on stage 4. We separated one filter from another by using the ampersand. And then we said, okay, now I also want to filter on product group. And I want to filter on product group 1. And then there's my comma to separate the fact that I also want to filter on product group 2, right? So this is like a static way to pass a hyperlink. All this to say, I'm just kind of communicating the basic structure and functionality of these things, because the real power is when you use it in a workbook and you tie it to a field in the workbook and you make it dynamic, right? So none of your users are typing in these URLs. They're just clicking on something and it's automatically passing all of this, right? Okay, so passing dynamic hyperlinks via action filter. This gives users one-click access, and we're going to use 2 workbooks that are currently published out on Tableau Public already that are already hyperlinked this way, just to kind of give you an example of how a user might do this or how you might deploy this out to your users. The application here, when you create it from within an action filter, is actually easier than it is when you're typing it out yourself, because you don't have to worry about all that protocol and the %20s and all that mess. Tableau will do it for you. So this is you create a URL action filter from the dashboard. And in this case, I selected one viz that I want to drive it. And I made it a menu selection action filter. And kind of a rule of thumb that I use is, if you're going to take the user out of the view that they're in and place them somewhere else in a different view, I always make that a menu filter because I don't want anyone to accidentally do that. If they're filtering like their own view and they're saying, show me product group 1, product group 2, and it's all within one view, that's a great opportunity to use a select filter. But because we're going to take them out of this workbook and into that workbook, we're using a menu filter to do that because it kind of makes sure that users are doubly sure that that's what they want to do before they do it. So here's our standard URL that we sort of laid out the structure here all along. But then we get to our question mark, and the text be any smaller. We get to our question mark here, and we follow it by the name of the field name, which is L1 ticket number. But I had the luxury of just using spaces. I just typed it out, L1 ticket number, right? I didn't have to worry about the %20s. And it equals, with these little brackets around it, the field name. So whenever users are hovering on a certain thing, they're going to land on that particular field result that they're clicked on. And so the way that you get the nice protocol to be added into your statement is you check the box for URL encode data values. So I have 5 minutes to wrap this up, so I'm going to do this real fast. So we have open support tickets here as a workbook, and we have escalation path. Both of these workbooks are exhibiting the subject matter of ticket management, just like our group was talking about before, like issues that come in and how they're managed, right? And in this scenario, and you can download this open ticket summary workbook too, so that you can play with this action filter at another time. But all this is doing is showing us that we have tickets, support tickets, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Issues get escalated if they're complex issues. And it shows how old they are, who's managing them, what product they're related to. We've got some nice little Vision Tooltip stuff going on here. I love Vision Tooltip, is awesome. That's not part of my discussion today, but if you haven't used it, I highly recommend it. But over here on our detail tab, this is one of those cases where we took the visuals and made them front and center, gave them their table down below. We actually made them more prominent than I would even do it in some other cases, but here's a table they can export, right? But say they're looking at ticket number 123, and they want to know, like, who's been handling that ticket? It's taking 336 days to close. Why is it taking so long, right? Where is it getting hung up? So, we've used this little icon just to indicate select to view escalation path. Like, how has this ticket been escalated through the process from team to team? Who's been sitting on it, right? So this is a way that you can go from, a summary level open ticket workbook over to this detail view, right? I landed on ticket 123. Ticket 123 is up in my URL, but I didn't type in 123 anywhere, right? I just clicked on the URL beside ticket 123, and it passed that for me. And it showed me that, my level 1 team had this ticket for 159 days, and, this particular person had it for had it the whole time, and they escalated it up to level 2, and it stayed unassigned for 36 days before anybody even looked at it, right? So it gave them the ability to really get into the nitty-gritty details and answer that question, like, what's going on with our process? How can we possibly have a ticket open for that long, right? So that's just one way that you can use those URL filters really great. I was not planning to talk about this at all, but it's in the workbook. All of these things are always a matter of preference, but in terms of my preferences for things like colors, fonts, and visual cues, you can get that here. That's just something to reference. And that's it. Thank you.